Hello and welcome to part 5 in our video series on building a TypeScript and Postgres API. Today we're going to be looking to add our first handler to our API server, and this is going to simply respond whether our API server is healthy and accepting connections and able to return data. It's a fairly common endpoint that most APIs will implement that's used for testing and observability so that you can periodically query your API just to make sure that it's up and running okay. If you do want to follow along, there is a link in the video description to the GitHub repo that we're working from. And if you head over there, you can check out the branch part 5, and that will bring you to the exact space that we are within our code here so that you can follow along in real time. So first things first, whenever I work with Express, any handlers that we have for our endpoints, I normally place into a handlers folder. And within here, what we're going to do is just add a health folder. So this is going to say there's going to be a health endpoint. We're going to add a new file called get.ts, and that's going to indicate that this file is going to handle GET requests for this health endpoint. So first things first, we're going to declare our handler. So we've got an export function, if I could type, export function health get handler. And this is going to take two arguments. It's going to be a request and a response argument. Now these request and response objects are actually going to come from Express, which is our API server. Request and response from Express. And then we're just going to add the types for these in here. So request and then response. This function is actually going to return void, which is essentially another way of stating it's going to return something undefined. So there's not actually going to be a return value from this function because we're actually going to be operating on this response object, which contains methods that you use for when you want to send data back to the front end. And what we're actually going to do is we're just going to simply implement res.status 200.send, and when a 200 response is sent for a health endpoint, it typically includes just the words OK, so that you can see on the front end a simple message to say yes, this is OK. And what you'll notice if you're using a similar IDE to me, like a VS Code, you'll notice that request is underlined because we actually don't make use of it, but we do include it so that we can access the response object, which is the second argument that this function accepts, or second parameter that this function accepts. So if you just add an underline underscore before request, then that will satisfy TypeScript and say, I don't actually need to use this particular variable. And then what we need to do, now that we've got our handler set up, we need to tell Express how to use this handler. And the way that we do that is we head over to our index file for our Express server, and underneath app, we simply add a new line called app.get /health, and then we have health get handler. Now, all this is going to do is say to Express, anytime somebody makes a GET request to this URL on our server, we want to execute this handler. And that's exactly what's going to happen in here. So we can actually test that this works okay by simply heading over to our terminal using npm run dev. So our API server is up and running. And we can use a curl command now. So curl http://localhost port 3000 /health. And what we should get back is a, what have we got here? Cannot get /health. Oops, there we go. So I didn't save it. Let's restart our API server. See, even in the real world, things don't always happen as expected. But now, after we've saved our file and rerun it again, we get the OK command, which is great. So what we're going to want to do now is we're going to want to just make sure that our unit tests are up to date as well, because we've added a new file and new function, and we've got a couple of issues to actually fix. We've got one, which is our express mock doesn't currently support the get function, and what we also find is that our get endpoint actually isn't tested either. So what we can do is we can head over to our mocks file, and we can simply add on here get jest.fn, and that will say that our express mock should support the get response, so get method. So if we run it again, we should find that that's actually that particular piece is fixed now, and now we just need to go in and write some unit tests for our health get handler. So what we'll do is head over to our health folder, and we'll do get.unit.test.ts. And this one should be fairly easy to implement because it's quite a simple function. So we'll just add a describe block. We'll add health get handler, and then we'll add a test that says it calls status with 200 and send with OK. So there's a couple of things that we're going to want to test here, and it's going to be quite a fun thing to actually test out here because we've got a couple of things that are kind of chained, and I'll show you how we implement testing on these chained functions here. So first things first, we want to, whenever you're testing a function like this that takes in properties or parameters, we're going to declare this request and response object. So we'll do that first. We'll do const rec equals empty object, and then as request. And the reason that we use as here is to simply make our lives easier for when it comes to testing. Generally speaking, when you're working with TypeScript, you never really want to see as used anywhere within your code base other than potentially within your test files to make your testing easier. And the reason is because by using as, you essentially bypass all of the type safety that TypeScript offers you by saying, I know what this object is better than TypeScript, and that can often lead to runtime validation issues. But for here, it's actually perfectly fine because it's well contained within a testing environment. So we're going to do the same here for response, except on response, what we're going to do, when we go and head over here, we'll see that response contains a status function, and it also contains a send function. So what we'll do is we'll add status, and that's going to be jest.fn, and we also know that it has a send function, jest.fn. So when we make use of that, we've got these two pieces here. What's it saying? What's it having issues with? Oh, it's saying that it's missing some properties. So if you want to bypass that, you can just do as response. So all it's complaining about there is that response actually expects quite a complicated object with quite a lot of fields on it. So it's not happy that we haven't declared all the fields on it. So we'll just bypass that particular check. So what we want to do now is we actually want to call our handler, and we want to pass in the request and the response. And what we should do is we should import this function. So we've got it. And then what we'll do is we'll do expect res dot status dot to have been called with, and then a 200, because we're actually expecting status to have been called with 200. And then next we're expecting send to have been called with OK. So that's the two bits that we want to check here, because if either of these changes, we actually want our test to pick it up and fail, because it would be a completely different behavior than we're actually expecting. Now we'll run these tests. I am expecting them to fail, and I'll talk you through why in a moment, and it's going to be to do with the chaining that these functions do. So we'll just do npm run unit test so that you can see what happens in this particular situation. And what it's saying here is cannot read properties of undefined reading send. And what this is saying is when we're calling this status function in here, it's expecting to then be able to call send afterwards, but a jest function by default will just return undefined. So what we actually want to do, there's a really nice operator for this. So and that is mock return this. And what that does is it says if this status function is called, I want it to return this object, so the object that it's part of. So if we call status, it's going to return an object that contains status and methods as to status and send as two methods on that object. And then we'll do the same for the for send here, and that will essentially allow us to then inspect that both of those functions are called, and we now have a passing test. So what we have at the moment is we have a really nice unit test that tests out this block of code. So a block of code, generally speaking, or a unit of code, generally refers to a single function, and that's kind of the smallest thing that you can actually test easily. But what we actually don't test at the moment is that our Express server actually works and that our health endpoint returns a 200 response with an OK when we actually make a legitimate HTTP request. So in the next video, what we're going to do is going to take a look at setting up our integration tests, which will actually allow us to run tests against our API as though it was acting as it would in the real world. So it's a really useful additional piece of testing to do that will test your code outside of just the basic units. I hope this video has been helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.